It's always worrying coming to conferences like this and seeing that the speaker before you is talking on a topic that's possibly what you could have named your proposal, but actually seeing what Alice is talking about, I think these two projects fit together quite well. So my name is Matt Williams. I work at the Bristol Centre for Supercomputing, based at the University of Bristol. And our project is really about trying to find a way to understand how a federated interface to data centers, to DRI, could provide the interfaces, interactions needed for mediating the data transfers that need to happen between sites. Less about physically how do you get the R clone or the SCP from A to B, but how do you get the information that you need to do that about people's identities, their access, and the rules that govern all of that. So we're doing this project in association with the Rosalind Franklin Institute. They've got a very unique situation where they don't have any of their own DRI on site. They use exclusively other DRI around the country, whether it's public cloud or research infrastructures provided in the tier 3s, tier 2s, etc. So they provide a good use case for understanding their kind of data transfer needs. But of course, throughout this process, we're going to be looking, like Alistair was as well, at how the wider community and their requirements for data transfers. So the project team for this is myself at the University of Bristol and Laura at the RFI. We're the PIs on this. Working with us as well, we've got James Womack just down here at the front at the University of Bristol and Wahab Kwafi as well. And then over at the RFI, we've got two of their research software engineers, Piper and Elaine, who are going to be helping us with some of the actual engineering and technical side of implementing this stuff, particularly with their data transfer needs. So as a bit of background, we come from a background of working in the AI research resources. Over the last few years, we've had this project called AirFed, which is in part what informs some of the work that's going on through this Network Plus project now. And in that, we did a lot of work about how we can do federated identities. That's the stuff we heard about yesterday to do with MyXID. How can multiple sites know about the same person and have the same way of identifying who they are? But even though they have a global view of what an identity of someone is, you always have like local identities within a system. You have your own Unix accounts and your own groups and all this sort of stuff. And you need that ability within each particular installation to be able to set it up how is appropriate for you. And that's fine when all you're doing is running jobs within a site. When you're talking about transferring data to and from two different sites where they might have two different local identities there, we need a way of understanding how we can federate the identities across them and track through things like permissions, what groups people are in, what data they're allowed to read or write in those two places. So that's sort of where we're starting to come into this and the problem space that we're starting to look at. The challenges that I think we come across are that there's lots of different ways we can do this stuff. We saw Alistair talking about the different actual file transfer technologies, and we're starting to look and identify that same situation is true. There's lots of different ways you can run this. Every single site is going to want their own sovereignty, as I've called it here, over the technologies that they install on their sites. And in fact, they might want to allow users to be installing their own technologies at the user level and not having the site admins interacting with that at all. So you need that flexibility for technology A or technology B to be used. But if you do have different technologies, you need a way for those to be interoperating between each other. And so what we're really trying to do with this project is find a way to design an API, an interface of some kind that encapsulates the needs of data movement in a federated world for research that can then transmit or communicate with technologies underneath to say, this person wants to copy data from here to here, but behind the scenes it's Globus, and so it's going to then do a Globus transfer or an FTS3 transfer or an SCP or whatever it happens to be, to put control into the hands of the users, but to allow us as a federation to be able to have a common language that we talk to each other in. Because really what I want to make sure we're doing here is having shared protocols about how we communicate, not necessarily using the same technologies underneath. Because technology changes over time. If we pin ourselves to one right now, in 5 years' time, by the time the roadmap's finished, we're going to have chosen the wrong one and things are going to have moved on. But if we can come up with the right protocols, the right concepts now, we hopefully have something that's adaptable over time. So there's a number of different parties that we need to start thinking about getting involved in this. Obviously, we have Bristol Centre for Supercomputing and the RFI. We're working on actually implementing some of this stuff, installing some software, testing it out, seeing how we can start to think about the design of an API, how it integrates with technologies. But all the other stakeholders and parties we need to be thinking about as well. So the people actually running the sites, even if an individual user's running their own little bit of software underneath, An API needs to be at a slightly elevated position, so we need to make sure we understand what technical security restrictions there might be on installing software at a site level. We have data owners, so people who actually have the data they want to have maybe certain protections on, whether it's open or closed, medical data, industrial, like sensitive data, understanding the requirements on that, and making sure the API can reflect the things that needs to, as well as the actual researchers, RSCs, who are doing the data transfers, who want to run some analysis on some data. Maybe they want to be using their own data tool. Maybe they want to be using something that's provided by the site. Different situations are going to be working different ways. Survey, I know. So really what we're trying to do at the beginning here is not necessarily a survey of people who are running DRIs. We want to understand what the needs of users are, how they interact with existing DRIs that are out there. So if you are a researcher or you work with researchers who are doing data transfers, we want to know what technologies you're using, what kind of requirements you have that we hadn't thought about to do with ownership or speed or the way that two different sites can communicate with each other in that way. So this is really what we're trying to gather at this point, is low-level user requirements rather than how can a site interact with this stuff. But we're going to be doing software landscape review, and I think we'll probably have a chat with Alistair because a lot of this is going to be overlapping with landscape review that's happening there. We don't want to duplicate effort. We want to make sure that we're dovetailing together quite well. Once we understand what this sort of overview is going to be, we're going to be evaluating some specific technologies to see how they map to this stuff. This is really just a way of furthering our understanding, not saying we're choosing these technologies and they're the answer, but by taking an example of what we think an API could be, looking at some examples that are out there, we'll identify gaps, things we didn't think about, things they can provide, things they don't provide, etc. So both on the API side, there's a tool called Firecrest. I think there's a talk about that at the last one of these Network Plus meetings. And behind that, we're going to experiment with a couple of specific technologies, FTS3 and Globus, both ones that Alistair mentioned previously. And the outcomes of this are going to be various reports saying, this is the API we found, these are the user requirements we found, this is what we think are the route forward that we are going to be recommending for the roadmap. Post this project, we know that whatever we find isn't going to be the right answer. There's technologies out there, but they're not all going to map perfectly to what we want. So we expect that down the line, there's going to be some development work needed to make sure these things actually all come together. But for now, we're not doing that development work. We just want to understand what might be needed, because specifically, we want to be making sure we're feeding stuff into the roadmap. So a landscape review of what is currently out there, the technologies for data movement itself, as well as the technologies for this sort of API communication in a federated world, making sure we understand what's there and what might fit or not fit a proposed API. So from that, we want to come up with a straw man of a reference API for what a federated data mover API could look like, with a view to these APIs could do more than just data movement in the future. A general API for how you can communicate with a data center or a DRI site is something we're sort of looking towards, focusing on the data movement part for now. So you want to understand, in principle, how might this get set up? What are the requirements for it? What pieces might we need to go together? And from the landscape review, which parts map to which? And then finally, of course, something to tangibly go into the roadmap. What do we think actually needs to happen over those 5 years of funded work that's going to be following on from this to make this a reality for the DRI to be able to do data movement in a seamless, transparent way? Thank you.